Hello, what's up guys? Welcome back to my channel, and for today's video we'll be looking at the Grand Mafia, and I'll be doing an updated tier list for free enforcers, which would include two different kinds of tier lists because we have to include signature weapons. So the first part of this would be the free enforcer tier list without including signature weapons, and the second part would be including their signature weapons, which will move some enforcers up or down the tier list depending on what their signature weapon buffs are. So I have blanked out the tier list and I'll unveil it tier by tier as I go down the list. So we'll start with the free enforcer without including their signature weapons, and I'll give you a short overview of what each highlight means and what each column might also mean. Basically the enforcer's name, followed by their name is their stats, and over at the end is if these enforcers are used for kingpin battles. So if the enforcers are used for kingpins, it is put a little bit into the consideration of where their tier is at. And also the green highlighted ones are enforcers that are developmental enforcers, while this like peach colored highlight is all enforcers that are considered as combat enforcers. So without further ado, let's unveil the S tier list. And over at the S tier list, the developmental enforcers, we have three enforcers, which is really, you must get these enforcers as quick as possible. The first one is Black Hawk, and you get this by completing the Operation Black Hawk. Every time I think you can get about 15 Black Hawk tokens, and according to my event schedule spreadsheet that I have, it seems that Operation Black Hawk will occur every about 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks you get about 15 tokens, and dividing that, you would take 22 Operation Black Hawk if you exchange the max 15 tokens to get your Black Hawk Grand, which would take you about 70 weeks, I think, around there, based on how often the event Operation Black Hawk will show. Next one is Lupo, and for the Black Hawk and Lupo, they are very good enforcers because it passively buffs your Kingpin attacks or whichever like Kingpin stats. So as you know, Kingpin is part of like the developmental track, and the more you invest in Kingpin, like double crit energy recovery speed, you can attempt to hit the Kingpins either more often, or there's a high chance of getting the Kingpin crits, or also you do more damage to Kingpin and you can kill the Kingpin much more quickly, and you can finish like sort of like the events that require you to kill Kingpins much more quickly without using as much energy drinks. So over the long run, you will really save a lot of these energy drinks, especially like level 5 Kingpin. And of course, lastly, for Neo, is both Kingpin and investment. And as you all know, investment takes a very long time, so better make Neo Grand as quickly as possible so that you really reduce a lot of the research timing. Even like 25% can even reduce the research timing by a couple of days if that research or investment takes a very long time. So this is why all these three are at the S tier list. Next up, we will look at the combat heroes, and we have Hellcat, Booba, Anonymous, Professor, Deathlock, and Big Shot. So obviously Hellcat is an S tier because very rarely you have free enforcers that give you crew attack and crew HP buffs, even though the last stats or buff is training speed, which is considered developmental buff, but having crew attack plus crew HP already makes this an S tier enforcer, which I would have to say the same for Professor. And Professor is even more amazing, even though it's like ridiculously difficult to get, because Professor gives a crew attack of 25%, and if you all know, the crew attack buff of 25% is only given to super enforcers, and it's evident for the new super enforcers trio, which is the Zengetsu, Arbiter, and Phantom, if I remember it correctly. So Professor's stats is similar to super enforcers in regards to just the crew attack buff, which is a plus 25%. And for Booba, it's the S tier because it's crew attack 20%. Not only that, it gives you biker health at 50%, even though its last buff is a developmental buff. But as long as it gives you crew attack for free enforcers, it is an automatically S tier. Same for Anonymous, 20% crew attack. However, it is less strong because it gives you traps and HP buffs, but it's also considered a combat stat because this is considering without signature weapons, which could apply that you are still early in the game, and being early in the game, walls would still really help you defend your base, because I just remember that back then our combat stats won't be as high and we won't be able to take down the wall so easily. So the wall buffs, traps buffs really makes a big difference early in the game. So therefore, Anonymous S tier. For Deathlord and Big Shot, Deathlord it gives you both attack and HP buffs. So for Grand Mafia, the top priority for buffs is the attack buffs, followed by that is the HP buffs. The lowest of the troops or unit buffs are defense. So because both Deathlord and Big Shot provides both attack and HP buff, they will be in the S tier. And not only that, but their last combat buff are trap related or wall related. So this means they are a 3 combat buff enforcer. Without further ado, let's take a look at A tier list and I'll explain why they are not on the S tier list. So we'll review the first 3 developmental heroes as usual first. And we have Bone Crusher, White Dwarf and Unreal. So I'll just give you both Bone Crusher and White Dwarf on why I think they are under the A tier list. Firstly, even though they have a very good 3 developmental buff for this enforcer, they only give half the strength of a normal enforcer's buff. So what I mean by that is, for example, Kingpin challenge damage plus 10%. As you can see, Lupo gives you 20%. And usually investment speed is either 20 or 25%, but White Dwarf only gives you 10%, which is why these enforcers are at the A tier. Other than that, they are also quite difficult to obtain or would take you a longer time to obtain the tokens, but it's mainly because they have reduced buff as compared to other enforcers for the developmental buff. So they are under the A tier list. Next up, Unreal. The reason why this is under the A tier list is because this is not a full developmental buff hero. We got one random rogue bruiser defense plus 50%, which isn't very helpful at all. And the remaining one is construction speed and restoration of energy. Basically, it's like Kingpin buff. And why Unreal is also under the A tier list is because usually for construction we won't really take a lot of time. So construction speed, yes, it is very helpful, but not as prioritized as investment speed. Therefore, it's under the A tier list. Still highly recommend you to get Unreal for your developmental hero as quick as possible too. And next up, we review the A tier combat heroes. And we got El Catador, Sparrow, Tony, Mike, and CJ. And as you have noticed, most of these second tier or A tier list enforcers buffs are troops attack accompanied by troops defense, with the exception of Mike and CJ. So for these two enforcers, why they are under the A list is for 2 different reasons. The first reason for Mike is because he has a cash production, a developmental buff, so it's not a full combat buff, therefore he's relegated to the A tier list. For CJ, he looks very perfect with biker attack and biker HP, and the last one is even like great, it's like combat buff, traps HP. But I have analyzed the free enforcers, and because Buba is a very good free biker enforcer, therefore CJ will be between an S or A tier list, because you will obviously choose Buba over CJ right above off the bat. But at the same time, I will also have to say that CJ could also be at the S tier list. And you could also come up with the argument of why Deathlord and Big Shot are not in the A tier list when Deathlord has like Hellcat and Big Shot has Anonymous. Back to why Deathlord is still an S tier is because Hellcat is really difficult to get and will take a long time from the start. So you might not even have Hellcat at Grand or even Elite right off the bat in the game. Therefore, Deathlord is a very good hero that you have to rely on. For Big Shot, the reason why he is there is because Anonymous, even though he has crew attack, but apart from crew attack buff, Enforcer doesn't really have anything much except for a random trap attack and a developmental buff. Therefore, I feel that you need another Hitman Enforcer to really buff up your 5 Enforcer army. So yeah, about CJ, it would kind of be a little bit debatable on where you might place him. Next, we'll move on to the B tier list, and for under the B tier list, we will have Captain, T-Rock, El Cazador, Belladonna, and Paulie. And the reason why they might be under the B tier is because they either do not have troop attack or they have basically just troop attack alone and no other combat buffs. As shown, for Captain and Paulie, we got both HP and defense buff, but we don't have any attack buff. And for the rest of the other enforcers, for example T-Rock, El Cazador, and Belladonna, we have the troops attack, but apart from that, we either have like developmental buff or like war buffs. So because of these random or buffs that do not really match well with each other, they are relegated under the B tier. However, this would not say that they are useless enforcers, because free enforcers are limited to the amount of enforcer that buffs up the specific troop type. So if you are going for like pure hitman raid, biker, or even bruiser raid, you have to utilize almost all of the free enforcer to be placed into your army. Next up, we look at the C tier, and we got one developmental hero, which is Vinny. And the reason why Vinny is over here is because, as you can see, it's a big mismatch as compared to Onryo, even though it has construction speed. But for Vinny, he has a random trap attack and biker defense. And as you know, for combat stats, defense is the lowest. And for construction, we know that it doesn't take a long time for buildings to be built. Therefore, Vinny is not really a high tier free enforcer, even though it gives you construction speed. Therefore, C tier for Vinny. And for the rest of the enforcers down here will be the mortar car. And the only reason why they are under the C tier is because all mortar car enforcers are useful in Kingpin battles. If they are not useful or they are not used under the Kingpin battles, they'll probably be in the D tier. And we got only one enforcer right in the D tier, and it is Madame Fragrance. Apart from being very extremely difficult to obtain, the Enforcer buffs is underwhelming, gives you talent points, production capacity, and diamond production. Diamond production might argue that it is good, but most of the people will probably have a lot of hospitals instead of diamond labs. And you obtain talent points considerably quickly with a strong commercial building. So Madam Fragrance is just a very bad enforcer to get, and I do not recommend you getting this enforcer at all. And now that we have gotten a general feel of the tier list and how I rank these enforcers, let's take a look at my tier list with the signature weapons, and there will just be a few shifts around, and I'll explain why I placed those enforcers at where they are, why I demoted them or even promoted them. So over here, I only have blanked out the enforcers that have been demoted or promoted. Let me give you a brief look. All these enforcers would be pretty much the same. They are basically where they were previously under the tier list. And as you can see, there are a few new enforcers under the A tier and the C tier. Means that there's a reduced number of enforcers under the S tier and the B tier list. So first, let's take a look at the B tier list and what enforcers are there. So over here, the first one we have is Anonymous, and it has been demoted from the S tier list. The reason why I say so is because the signature weapon gives you a cargo production, and for combat enforcer, why do you need cargo production? So it's obviously a very bad signature weapon. And apart from that, if you're able to unlock signature weapons already for enforcers, means you're quite like mid or even late game, and I will assume that you would have gotten Hellcat to Grand and on your way to getting like Professor at a very good grade. And with that, you can kind of replace Anonymous with Hellcat, which is a very strong enforcer because Hellcat and Professor both has insane signature weapon buffs. Both Hellcat and Professor grants crew HP, and other than that, they also give you crew attack for their exclusive weapon. Over here, I've added up the stats when you have unlocked both the signature weapon and the exclusive weapon, and you can see that 32% crew attack and 40% crew attack buff is insane. The next person on the list over here is Polly, as you can see right here. Polly, the reason why Polly has been upgraded from a B tier to an A tier is because its signature weapon gives him hitman attack of 10%. Even though 10% isn't very much, maybe a 20% deficit from the rest of the enforcer, but he has a full like HP and defense combat buff, and I would think that just this little boost of 10% attack is good enough to be boosted as an A tier enforcer that gives you full HP and defense buff with a little bit of attack buff. Of course, the attacking mechanics of the Grand Mafia is very complicated, and I'm not sure how much difference would HP, defense, and attack make altogether. However, I think that because of Polly's great signature weapon, he deserves to be promoted to an A tier. And over at the C tier list, for the B tier there's no change. For the C tier list, there are enforcers that were demoted from the B tier list, and these are T-Rock and Belladonna. The main reason is just that their signature weapons gives them developmental buffs when they have really good combat buffs as an
Don't you
enforcer.
worry, I'll take
And the
care of
reason
it.
why these two enforcers stayed at B tier is because for El Cazador it is a combat signature weapon buff. Even though Captain didn't receive a combat signature buff, but originally he has two really good combat stats, which directly influences the troops' stats rather than having only one combat stats which influences the troops' damage. And by then, because you have probably be able to unlock signature weapons late game, wars doesn't really help, and the trap or war defense buff probably isn't as helpful anymore, which is why they are also being demoted to the C tier for T-Rock and Belladonna. If you are not really good with seeing these like list and spreadsheet, I have the tier list shown under the tier list maker to let you see how the final outcome is. And I have the free enforcers without signature weapons and free enforcers with the signature weapons. So yes, this is it, and I hope you guys enjoy this video on my up on my updated tier list on free enforcers. And if you do like my video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys again soon for the next The Grand Mafia video.